Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the Friday Finish. My name is Vicki. I'm the Director of Community Relations and Communications here at Assisting Hands Home Care. And this Friday, since it's the last Friday in February, we're going to talk about some significant contributions from African Americans to healthcare. Now, there's many contributions from the African American community to modern healthcare, but I picked three I thought were very interesting. And of course, as I talk through them, when I'm done, you'll see the links in the Facebook post and the YouTube video. So you can read more about these fantastic individuals who I couldn't imagine where we'd be without them. First, February we know is Heart Month. So I thought I would start with a gentleman by the name of Otis Boykin. He was born in 1920 and died in 1982. He was an inventor, and he held 28 patents throughout his career. Early electronics, and he developed components that helped with television production and computers, believe it or not, which I thought was really fantastic and cool. But what's most interesting is he was more well-known for making improvements to the pacemaker that helps your heart. So the pacemaker is a device that uses electrical impulses to help your heart maintain a regular heartbeat. And he developed the control unit to help regulate the pacemaker with precision. The irony of him is he died of heart failure in 1982. So that was very sad, but he has contributed and saved thousands of lives with, his developments for the pacemaker. So he was very interesting. The next one I thought was very interesting was Dr. Solomon Carter Fuller. He was born in 1872 in Liberia. He lived with his grandparents who were medical missionaries in Liberia. And he was a neuropathologist, which was, way ahead of his time. Because if you think about the climate in that, in the generation where he lived from 1872 to 1953, segregation. And because of the discrimination against African Americans, he was relegated to autopsies. As awful as this sounds, it actually helped him in his career because he was noticed by Dr. Alois Alzheimer and was recruited to work in his laboratory at the Royal Psychiatric Hospital in Munich. Now, if you recognize the name Alois Alzheimer is the doctor who's credited with naming Alzheimer's disease, named after him, because he discovered, the disease. And Dr. Fuller is one of the people who helped identify the plaques in the brain that established Alzheimer's as a disease and not a mental condition. So that was huge. And Dr. Fuller translated much of Dr. Alzheimer's work into English, including the first case of Alzheimer's. So it was very, he was a trailblazer for his time. So that, without him, where would we be with the, start of Alzheimer's research? So that was fantastic. And, to think he accomplished all of this before the Civil Rights Act was passed. And then there's the third person I chose, who I thought was also very interesting. Not a scientist. She was an ordinary young African-American mother in the 1950s. Her name is Henrietta Lacks, and she visited Johns Hopkins Hospital in 1951 because Johns Hopkins was one of the few hospitals who would treat poor African Americans in that era. and they discovered she had an aggressive cervical cancer at the age of 31. So she was very, very young. During the time, it was normal where they took samples, tissue samples of the cancer cells, and they did the biopsy, and through that they discovered that the cells replicated themselves, which is unheard of, because they were trying to get cells of cancers and whatnot to replicate in the petri dish so they could study disease, and a lot of them just died in the dish. So it was very exciting that Mrs. Lack's cells replicated. And the only thing is, they didn't ask her permission. They didn't ask her family's permission to take those cells or distribute them. So she had the first, it's called an Immortal human cell line. And it is these, collected cells were one of the most important cell lines in medical research. The Immortal line is called the HeLa line for Henrietta Lacks. It's named in her honor. And her cells have been used to study the effects of drugs, hormones, viruses, toxins, and all kinds of things on the growth of cancer cells. So they don't have to experiment on human beings, they can experiment on these cells. But they've also been used to study the human genome. And one of the most critical things that this cell line has done was play a role in the development of the polio vaccine. But there is a lot to learn about Henrietta Lacks and her family, and the fact that they did not ask permission, and what her family has gone through, knowing that this was done without her permission, but yet there's been a lot of advances. So it's a very interesting story. There's actually a medical writer, Rebecca Scoot, took an interest in Henrietta Lacks and wrote a book about the experience of the Lacks family and what Henrietta went through and what the family has gone through over the years, knowing what happened to their ancestor. So it's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Very interesting read, very interesting story, very interesting debate about that time and how people were treated, especially people of color who were poor. So it's a very fantastic read. So those are the three people we are talking about today. There's numerous others, even as recently as, former First Lady Michelle Obama and her devotion to promoting physical health and working against childhood obesity. There was, Ben Carson, you might remember him. He ran for president in 2016. He was a brain surgeon, pioneering brain surgeon that was famous for separating conjoined twins. And at 33, he was the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Children's Center. There was Patricia Bath. She was the first African-American woman who completed ophthalmology residency at NYU School of Medicine in the early 70s. Who else? There were so many people. Dr. Lois Wright. She was the first African-American doctor appointed to a staff position at the municipal hospital in New York City. And then in 1929, the city hired him as a police surgeon. So there were so many folks of color who have made innumerable contributions to healthcare and healthcare education and publishing and whatnot. So take a look at the links, and happy reading, and I will see you next Friday.